Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por estar aquí el día de hoy con nosotros para esta presentación que es Su Ciudad, Su Dinero. Yo me llamo Guadalupe Jasso, soy organizadora comunitaria del Buen Vecino. Como ya se explicó, vamos a tener intérpretes que nos van a apoyar con la traducción. Si ven que yo hablo un poquito más lento, un poquito más despacio, solamente es para que las intérpretes puedan traducir todo lo que se está diciendo y para que no se le haga tan difícil para ellas. Y también les quiero presentar a mi compañera Kelly, que va a estar dando esta presentación en inglés.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight and welcome to this presentation, Your City, Your Money, a Simi Valley budget presentation that is made by community members for community members. Before we start, we have two simple notes. The first one being there will be a Q&A after this presentation. So if you have any questions, please save them till the end. The second note being this is being interpreted in both Spanish and English. So just to reiterate that we are going to be speaking slowly and trying to enunciate so that we have a good situation for our interpreters. Thank you.
Ok, vamos a estar hablando el día de hoy. Quiero empezar con la agenda. Aquí en la agenda, el número 1 es
agenda. The first thing is the introduction of Buen Vecino, who we are. Also, we're going to be talking about what's the budget of the city of Simi Valley, and also that's why it's important. What's the process of the city to develop the budget, and we're going to be also be talking about the budget of Simi Valley. What are the concerns of Buen Vecino? Also the opportunities for you to engagement opportunities, and also how to make your voice heard, and also the sessions of questions and our answers at the end of this presentation.
So this presentation is being hosted by Buen Vecino. Buen Vecino is a nonprofit that started in 2017. It primarily serves East Ventura County, centering in on Thousand Oaks and Simi Valley. Buen Vecino started as an organization dedicated to immigration, but has since expanded to social justice. Under Buen Vecino, a coalition named the Good Neighbor Coalition has started to create equity in communities. And it starts with diversity and inclusion and making sure that community members watch out for each other by being good neighbors, or Buen Vecino. We are currently open to volunteers and we hope that you like the work that we put out.
Nos queremos enfocar.
What we want to focus is with language justice, because this is very important for us here in Buen Vecino. So to start with, I just want to let you know, I want to tell you a little bit about what is language justice. It's the just systemic treatment of people of all linguistic communities and respect for fundamental language rights of all people. Also, I want to talk about the language access. It's the use of assistance that means in interpretation and traduction, so that people that speak different languages, that it's not the dominant language that is English, also they can get access to public services and also to the civic participation. Because if everything is in English, then it's very hard for the community.
Oh, sorry, can you go back one more? I'm so sorry. To language access laws in California. Can we go back one more? Sorry. If not, it's okay. So, solamente quiero hablar sobre leyes
I want to tell you about the language access laws in California.
Ley de Derechos Civiles
The,
de California.
this is the California Civil Rights that prohibits discrimination by agencies that receive state funds and requires them to provide equal access to benefits without regard of the beneficiary's race, color, national origin, or ethnic group identification, among other classifications. The bilingual services law requires that local public agencies provide language access and services to speakers with limited English proficiency. So for us in Buen Vecino, we uh, we we are in favor of language justice. That's why we work so hard to give this presentation, not only in English, but also in Spanish, so that everybody gets access bilingually. Also, we hope that the city can keep on supporting this because there are opportunities where we, as members of the community, we can participate in things of the community, of the city, but it's not a right that it should be just taken because you don't speak the dominant language. That's why it's very important that everyone has the right so that language is not a barrier.
So our first section of tonight's presentation is going to be, what is the Simi Valley City budget and why does it matter?
Okay, so aquí vamos a hablar cuál es.
So here we're gonna talk about the budget. The budget is the financial plan that allocates money to various departments and services of the city, including police, transit, water, housing, library, arts, etc. To start with the statement of your values, and it's funded by taxpayers. That is us, the members of the community. And so the budget is a living document that it can be edited and adjusted by the city council. Parks and Recreation, the fire department, and the Simi Valley School District, they have separate budgets from the Simi Valley city budget. So I just wanted you to let you know that this is something different and it's separate from what I have spoken previously.
So how does the budget affect your life? While we may feel isolated from the budget because it's a long document filled with numbers and a lot of official vocabulary, it does affect nearly every facet of our lives as local constituents of Simi Valley. So first and foremost, it is your money. Your property taxes, sales taxes, and service charges all pay for the city's revenue, meaning that all of the allocations of the budget is your money, your tax-paying dollars. Leading into that, the revenue that goes into the budget is allocated into different departments. Those departments are filled with different things that affect you on a daily basis. So for example, there's public safety, infrastructure, youth and senior services, cultural arts. These are all things that affect you and your family. Next slide. Therefore, since it's affecting you and your family and it is your money, it is your right to speak about where you want to see your hard-earned dollars spent. It's important because the city council votes on the budget and either approves or amends it, that you need to have your voice heard of what you want your community to look like for both yourself and your loved ones. Next slide.
Okay, En esta parte de aquí vamos a hablar sobre
So now we're going to talk about the city process for developing the budget.
Later on, we will be showing a timeline of the budget process. So please keep in mind that this process right here takes a span of a whole year. But the budget is created by a plethora of different avenues, departments, people, decision makers. So the first part is departments themselves will start to create budgets according to their own unique needs, whether they hired someone new, so they need to increase it, or they're experiencing staff shortages, so they need to decrease it. Whatever they're experiencing in that department is reflected in that proposed budget that they're creating themselves. Then the city manager will collect all these proposed budgets from the department and enact a set of negotiation phase where they speak about what is the overall budget for the city and what is realistic for these departments and what is necessary. In the past, we have seen constituency input through different committees or organizations that the city has set up. For example, the Budget Advisory Committee gave input on the budget. Unfortunately, that ended in 2019. We're also seeing decision makers interact with the neighborhood council to kind of gain their input on certain things. But once the city manager has finished the process of negotiating with the departments, as well as including different inputs from city employees or constituents, it's then proposed to the city council to take a vote on. Next.
So, a continuar,
Para continuar, el Consejo the City Council has the power to approve the budget or to make any needed adjustments. While the adoption of time is in the summer, the City Council can edit the budget at any time if it's necessary. Unfortunately, there are not opportunities for the city to select throughout the budget formation process, only at the end when it's already been proposed. What it means is that through all this time, there are no opportunities for constituency input so that someone can give an opinion or suggestions. All this is done at the end when it's proposed, and that doesn't give us that much time.
If you are unfamiliar with the structure of the decision makers and stakeholders involved in the budget process, this is a great visual graph. At the top, we have voting constituents like you and me. These are the people who make up the city, who are taxpayers and get to vote in the city council members and the mayor. So from that arrow, we have the mayor. The mayor is elected at large, meaning that anyone in the city who's a Simi Valley citizen is eligible to vote for the mayor. Our current mayor is Keith Mashburn. Next to the mayor, we have 4 city council members. We have Elaine Litster representing District 1, Dee Kavanaugh representing District 3, and we have Mike Judge and Ruth Luevanos who are currently at large. It's important to note that we are actually moving to district voting, meaning that in order to vote for a city council member, it has to be in your district, but a reminder that you can vote for the mayor no matter where you are in the city. Underneath the city council, you have the city attorney, and the city attorney is currently David Garcedes, and they are basically in charge of making sure that the city is in bounds when it comes to any legal trouble or any zoning or codes or protocols that they need to be aware of. And then on the left, you have the city manager. Our current city manager is Brian Gabler. As we talked about before, the city manager is crucial in the development of the budget. He is the person that negotiates with the different departments and drafts it to introduce it to the city council. And then below the city manager, we have the heads of the departments. And so for the administrative services, we have Joseph Tony. For environmental services, we have Stratus Peros. And then for the two largest departments that take up the general fund, we have the Public Works Director, Ron Fujiwaki, and then we have the Police Chief, David Livingstone, next.
So, nomás les queremos enseñar una mapa.
So we just want to show you a map of Simi Valley. We have our 4 districts, and each city council of the city has a jurisdiction to edit or adapt or disapprove the budget. Like Kelly mentioned, you can only vote for your council members in your district. So for example, this year, 2022, there will be an election for districts 2 and 4, and then it will alternate into district 1 and 3. Next slide.
As promised, here is the timeline of the budget from a year review. From November to February, that is when departments are forming budgets according to their own unique needs. From March to April, the city manager is meeting with the different departments, negotiating, speaking about what realistically they can do with the funds available. Then in coordination with the city manager and the departments, they create the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And then from May to June, that is when it's introduced formally to the public. Normally for the public forum, it's introduced about a week and a half before it comes out. And then there's the public forum about 2 weeks before the city council votes on it. So there's about a 3-week period for constituents to oversee that proposed budget. And then June to July is when the city council votes on that budget. And then whether or not it's amended or implemented, that is voted on. And then the process repeats from there. Next slide.
Okay. En la siguiente parte de
On the next part of this presentation, we will talk a little bit about a summary of the budget of the city, Simi Valley.
The budget is scary for a lot of reasons. One being that there are a lot of numbers involved, and also a bunch of sources in which we gain our monetary revenue. So for the simplicity of this presentation, we are going to focus on the general fund, primarily because it's the biggest source of revenue. It funds all of the different departments of the city, and 85% of it handles the salaries of city employees. We did want to include these different types of funding for your own knowledge, but you don't need to know them unless you want to be an absolute expert on the area, and they can be very intimidating. So to go over them, we have the general fund, which is what we're going to be going over in length. Then enterprise funds covers transit, sanitation, waterworks. So how I like to explain this to people is if there's a pothole in the street, the person filling the pothole is covered by the general fund because that covers salaries of city employees, while the materials to fill the pothole is covered by enterprise funds. Then there's internal service funds that covers liability insurance, workers' compensation, financial information systems, GIS operating. Next slide. And you have other types of funds like the special revenue funds. This one is especially important to us this year because with the pandemic coming in 2020, we actually have about $16 million as a surplus from the American Rescue Plan. This is crucial, especially if you want to see how the budget affects your life, that is $16 million that the city has to spend on what they want. So if you have something in the city that you would like to see, that is something to bring up to the city council, since we have that surplus from those COVID funds. We have the former Community Development Agency funds that primarily deals with housing programs. And then you have capital funds, which are similar to enterprise funds that deals with more maintenance things like streets, roads, lights, things having to do with infrastructure. Next slide.
Okay. En esta parte de aquí es el
In this
monto
part, the main
principal
focus is on the general fund.
principal de ingresos.
It is the main source of revenue. It comes from property taxes, sales taxes, and service charges.
Los gastos de personal
Eh,
comprenden
Personnel
el
costs
85%
comprise
del
85% of the
total,
general fund,
o se pueden reasignar fondos a diferentes
and funds to different departments and cities can be reallocated. Next slide.
Otra cosa que el
Another
presupuesto
thing that the general fund
ingresos de la ciudad, so,
is that the general fund is the source of the city's revenue. It funds these areas: the police department, public works, environmental services, administrative services,
administración municipal,
city administration, and the
municipal.
city attorney.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Here we have a breakdown of the general fund for the proposed fiscal year of 2022 to 23. On the left, we have the amount of how much the departments increased by in terms of revenue. A quick analysis of that is all of the departments increased their revenue and funding allocations from the last fiscal year. You have the largest increase being the police department, followed by public works. There's exact numbers there ranging from about 11,000 all the way to $3,200,000. On the right, you have the amount of how much each department would be taking up in this proposed year. So you have the largest being the police department at around 45%, public works second largest at 20.7%, environmental services at 9.8%, administrative services at 7.6%, city attorney at 1.8%, city administration at 8%, non-departmental at 6.8%, and the smallest one is emergency services at 0.4%. And the total overall budget that we have for the general fund is the number on the bottom, $84,668,194. Next slide.
So, vamos a hablar con el departamento que está.
So we'll talk about the department that will be receiving the majority of these funds. It's the police department. They are responsible for public safety. The department takes nearly half of the city's budget at 44.82%. Most of these costs go to officer personnel, like that would be like salaries, overtime, benefits, etc. While the small minority goes to training, etc. This is the number one department that received the most funding in percentage increase that we saw. Next slide. So in the increase, we saw that they went over $3 million. Public Works is in second place for increased funds. It did also go over $3 million. And we also want to let you know that there's 114 sworn officers. Their average compensation, including benefits, is about $159,717. And there is 382 non-sworn personnel, and their average compensation, including benefits, is $89,225. Next slide.
Since the police department takes up the largest stake of the pie, there's an importance to have transparency and accountability in the services that they offer, especially because our taxpaying dollars are going to that entity. So when we speak about policing, it's important to examine how we're doing in comparison with our neighboring sister cities. In this current graph, it's how much our neighboring cities spend on their police. We have Moore Park, Thousand Oaks, and Simi Valley. It's important to note that Moore Park is a little smaller than Simi Valley, so Thousand Oaks is a little bit more comparable in the sense that we have about the same median income, size, geographic size, and also population size. So on the very top, you can see that Moore Park is reaching about 40% of its budget dedicated to the police. Then second, we have Thousand Oaks, and they spend around 30% of their budget on the police. And then with the highest amount allotted, we have Simi Valley with about 45% of its budget dedicated to the police. Next slide. And then this city compares the amount of crime we have in comparison to how much we spend on the police. The light blue represents violent crime, while the darker blue represents property crime. But throughout the three cities, you can see that violent crime is significantly lower than property crime. The reason for that being is that violent crime is very aggressive crimes. So that's murder, harassment, assault, any crime in which a person is being physically harmed, while property crime is a little less so. It's petty theft or burglary or trespassing property. So Moore Park has the lowest amount of crime overall. 6.89 out of 1,000 people are projected to experience crime. Thousand Oaks is followed by this. It's 11.18 out of 1,000 people are projected to experience crime. And then Simi Valley has both the highest violent crime as well as property crime, despite spending more on police. Thousand Oaks, they spend about 15% more, and they have 11.97 out of 1,000 people projected to experience crime. So it's important to note here that while Simi Valley spends the most on policing, we have comparable rates of crime to Thousand Oaks. We even have a little bit more crime as depicted in this graph. Next slide.
Okay, so aquí estamos hablando con las
So here we're going to
públicas.
talk about public works. Public works is in charge of public infrastructure. So things such as sewer, maintenance, water works, etc. And I just want to remind you that we did mention with Kelly at the beginning that the enterprise funds versus general funds are quite different. So for example, the enterprise funds focuses on transit, waterworks, and sanitation, etc. And for the fiscal year, for 22 and 23, it's about $17.5 million, which is roughly 20% of the budget. Next slide.
Next department we have is administrative services. They are essentially ensuring the cohesiveness of the city and that it's all working together as a functional unit, in any office or clerical government sense. So they are in charge of payroll, accounting, emailing, media and graphic services. So making sure that city employees can effectively communicate not only with each other, but also to the public. This department comprises $6,481,000 $520 of the budget, which comes out to roughly 7.6% of the entire budget. Next slide.
Aquí estamos hablando sobre el
Here we
abogado
talk
general.
about
So, este
city
es el
attorney. So
equipo
this is the
que
team
brinda
that gives legal advice to
al
city council
para cumplir con los
to meet necessary requirements,
So, seguir el código adecuado
follow proper code, and avoid legal trouble.
con el personal es el abogado municipal,
So staff would be a city attorney, a legal administrative assistant, the legal technician, the senior assistant city attorney, and the assistant city attorney.
abogado municipal asistente. Y esto se comprende
And that comprises a little bit over $1 million, which is about 1.8 or almost 2% of the budget.
So the next department we have is city administration. This might be the department that you might be more familiar with because they are the most open to the public. They handle the administrative and clerical side of the policy-making entity, which is both the city manager and the city council. The people that you vote in, city manager is appointed, but city council, you should be fairly familiar with. So city administration is actually very unique in the sense that since 2019, when the community services branch was dissolved, city administration extended its responsibilities to arts, youth and senior services, as well as equity and diversity. And this was a direct result of the community services branch being dissolved. So this year they're receiving $6,768,475, or about 8% of the entire budget. Next slide, please. Environmental services is also in that same section as city administration, because after the community services branch was dissolved in 2019, they became responsible for neighborhood services, which includes neighborhood council, as well as animal services. Environmental services as a department overall, though, is in charge of primarily housing, development, and construction. So these are the people overseeing affordable housing, ensuring that proper code is followed, permits for any land use, making sure that the land that is built on doesn't have any protected species on it in terms of animals or plants, things like that. And this fiscal year, they are projected to get $8,348,925, which is about roughly 10% of the budget. Next slide.
En esta parte de la presentación vamos a hablar
Okay,
sobre
now we're gonna talk about the concerns of Buen Vecino in this part of this presentation. Next slide.
algo que queremos
So something that we want is more the community involvement. So what we're doing is calling on the city to commit to a more participatory budgeting process, expanding who gets a say in creating the budget, and also determining what our community needs to thrive. So a special effort should be made to hear from city residents who are the most vulnerable and are struggling. The city should outreach to community organizations to invite to participation. Next slide.
Another component that we see is vital to community involvement in such a great document like the budget is that it should be accessible in both English and Spanish. As you've seen, Buen Vecino has a commitment to making sure that everything is bilingual. And with the largest minority group being Latinos in Simi Valley, we think it's important that their government is accessible to them in any language that they may have. This also is grouped with having virtual presentations on the budget, currently it's only in person for in-budget meetings. We also urge city leaders to release the draft budget a lot earlier in the process so community members have an opportunity to oversee it. Since there's no longer a budget advisory committee that was there to kind of give their input throughout the year regarding the budget, constituents like you and myself deserve more than about 2 to 3 weeks to oversee a 300-page document. So we hope that in lieu of prohibiting an organization established to create a liaison between the community and the city government, that they release the draft budget so that there's more time for busy constituents like ourselves to overlook it and see the changes that they're making with our tax-paying dollars. Next slide. And so for this portion, the Budget Advisory Committee, when it was in service, actually did a city employee survey back in 2019. And we thought that this was important to showcase, specifically because the general fund covers majority salaries of city employees. So every department we are talking about, whether that be city administration, environmental services, public safety, they are all affected by the funding allocations that are set forth by the general fund. And as a result, we are affected by the service that we receive as constituents from those separate departments. So this specific quote was from the city employee survey, highlighting the sort of staff morale and service that you're identifying in Simi Valley. So quote, "How can anyone provide good service while trying to maintain several positions at once? Adding more and more responsibilities to staff is only setting the city up for disaster. Not only is the city losing employees to retirement, but also to other cities that are not only paying more, but for far less work." So that last sentence is kind of highlighting the comparison to our neighboring sister cities. Next slide.
Otro testimonio que miramos.
Another quote from the city staff members. It was said, "Many of us do not have much hope because we do not have faith in the city council ability to lead. Implement what has been recommended by the committee. Don't kick that can down the road." Next slide, please.
Next quote says, quote, "Certainly the big elephant in the room is the impact that PD, police department, has on the general fund. A proper and unbiased study should be initiated to properly determine what might be done to alleviate this potential problem. It may not pencil out until a full and unbiased study is done along that line. Any speculation on partially evaluated financial impacts is wasteful imaginings. Doing a study would put the issue to rest once and for all of us," end quote. So this is important to note because the police department does take up the biggest share of the pie and has a pattern of receiving the largest increase in income and revenue each fiscal year. And so here you're seeing an employee addressing this head on. And while it might be an awkward conversation and topic to enter, it's one that is clearly being identified by city employees themselves. In terms of an unbiased study, it was found that the president of the Budget Advisory Committee also held a board member position with the police foundation and also was the owner of the business that conducted the city employee survey. So in that aspect, you're seeing a lot of conflict of interest. And perhaps a suggestion would be to have an outsider source who doesn't have a stake in where budget allocations are going to perform a fair assessment of, city employees, the allocations of their departments, and hopefully that will make city employees more apt to discuss their dissatisfaction or satisfaction with how the general fund is being split. Next slide.
So aquí vamos a hablar sobre
So now we're going to talk about transparency and accountability. Even though it's supposed to be an open and public budget process, it's too opaque, it's secretive, and it's also undemocratic. Department requests should be made public so that community members can see how calls to fund community services are reflected in the proposed budget. Next slide.
Another point that we are suggesting is that the Budget Advisory Committee be reopened. It was unfortunately closed in 2020 without real attention from the public. For a while, they had the website up. So we are asking that they reinstitute the Budget Advisory Committee so it can help ensure due diligence and create as a liaison for community members to advise on city budget issues. As it is right now, there is only the public forum and the city council meetings, about 3 hours collectively, dedicated to constituency input at the very end of the process. Seems very undemocratic and a barrier for constituents to give input on their tax-paying dollars. Another thing that is a point that should be made is to allocate sufficient funds in the budget to hire an independent auditor to perform a management audit of police department costs and expenditures. As we have said before, the police department takes up 45% of the pie, which is the largest of any of the departments. And within that allocation, about 95% of that funding goes to police officers' salaries, which includes overtime. So an example could be, how is that overtime distributed? How is it decided where that overtime goes? Who is it allotted to? And the city has had a history of actually having outside sources to help them make sure that their budget is the most fair and equitable that can be. Just this year, one of their accomplishments was engaging a consultant to develop an economic development strategic plan. And so we feel that this is on par with the city's mission of making sure that the budget is fair and transparent to the public, and that our dollar is being spent to the best of its ability. Next slide, please.
So aquí vamos a hablar sobre
So here we're going to talk about the funding priorities. The budget should increase the balance of funding support for needs such as affordable housing, public health, healthcare, mental health, and also wellness, child and youth development, also food security, public transportation, support for small businesses, fighting the impact of climate change, and also ensuring that our city's environment is protected. Next slide. So we also believe that the budget from the police department, the portion of the budget should be closer to those of the neighboring cities, allowing for greater funding of community services that would promote health and well-being of the city residents. Next slide.
The next portion is community engagement opportunities.
So, aquí vamos a hablar sobre las oportunidades de la
So
ciudad.
here we're going to talk about the city opportunities for budget involvement. So this is where we can present and, you know, have a voice about what we hear today. So number one, there's going to be a public forum that is hosted by the Administrative Service Director. And that this is June 1st, 2022 at 5:30. And this is tomorrow. Number two, it's another opportunity that we're going to have here in our community. It's going to be the city council meeting, where we will be discussed and we can be voted on the budget. This is going to happen on June 13, 2022, and this is going to be at 6:30 p.m. So you know, this is going to take approximately, it's going to take 3 hours of your time, and it's going to be time by the city for the most of the important decisions for the city. Next slide.
So one of the ways in which you can get involved in the city budget process is the public forum. So the public forum is hosted by the Director of Administrative Services and their respective personnel in the office. It is a town hall type of meeting where they present the departments, kind of like we did, as well with a Q&A where you can ask any questions about the allocations of the departments, anything that you want clarification on, or suggestions that you have for the city council members. Next slide, please. So funnily enough, the public forum is actually scheduled for tomorrow, June 1st. It is at 5:30 p.m. at City Council. The one bad thing is it's only in person. So if you get off work at 5 and you don't have great access to transportation, it might be a little inconvenient for you to attend this. But it is held 2 weeks before the city council meeting, where city council members will vote to either amend or approve the city budget. That city council meeting is taking place on June 13th. So this allows time to formulate what you would want to say, perhaps in public comment to the city council members. It is a little inconvenient just because, as I said previously, it's towards the end of the process where the budget has sort of been finalized and structured already, but they do allow those 2 meetings, about an hour and a half each, to allow you to express your, concerns and opinions on the city budget. Next slide, please.
So, hablando un poquito más sobre la.
So speaking a little bit about the second opportunity that you will have is the city council budget meeting. So here the constituents, which is us, community members, we can do public comment to the city council and as suggestions or edits to the budget. You can do this either in person, and tomorrow you can also do it via email. The city council has the power to vote on the approval of the city budget or consider constituent suggestions and formally add adjustment requests. Next slide. So with this second chance that you do have to be able to be present for the budget meeting, it is crucial, and the last opportunity for community members to voice their concerns before the budget is finalized. And this is already scheduled for June 13th at 6:30 p.m. Next slide.
These next couple of slides are dedicated to the Budget Advisory Committee. And while we have said this term before, we wanted to really familiarize it with yourselves a little bit more, because at the end of this presentation, we are hoping that all of us are in agreement in the fact that 3 hours dedicated to constituency input on one of the most pivotal documents that comes out of the city is simply not enough in terms of transparency and accountability and representativeness in terms of the city. So the Budget Advisory Committee was a committee created by the City Council during a time when the city was in economic turmoil. It was comprised of community members and appointed by different city council members. It basically spoke, met with departments, had presentations, and was one of the liaisons in which community members could speak directly to the ones making the decisions. Next slide. There were 7 members on the committee, and they all ranged from political affiliation and from occupation, and really were diverse in their sort of representativeness and what Simi Valley members wanted. So while some were small business owners, others were involved in nonprofits, and others were involved in the city through other ways, such as volunteering or being on other committees. Next. As I've said earlier, this was an opportunity for departments to talk to this community about their own proposed budgets before they gave them to the city manager. It was a great year-long way for constituents to be involved, and for constituents who weren't appointed to the Budget Advisory Committee. They held monthly meetings that constituents like yourselves and myself could come directly talk to community members. It was a community effort. Unfortunately, it was disbanded, like we said, in 2020 without any real notice. The website had the Budget Advisory Committee information minutes on it up until this year. And while last year we pushed for them to reinstitute the Budget Advisory Committee, there has been no incentive for the City Council to do it, as they've stated that it's only in a time of economic turmoil. But we believe that the budget, no matter what stance the budget is in, there should always be constituency input, and especially city organized and designated time for constituents to give their input. Next slide, please.
Okay, so hay más oportunidades de defensa.
So there will be more advocacy opportunities for us as members of the community. Number 1 would be neighborhood council. It is a volunteer executive board that is conformed by 13 members. It advises the city leadership on citizenship concerns and represents the 4 city districts. Next slide. The other opportunity for advocacy would be also to contact a city member. So what you could do is find a department that you are interested in contacting. You can email the person in charge with questions, and you can ask them to set up a meeting. Next slide. And the third opportunity for advocacy would be public comment. So this can be in person. Sometimes there are just opportunities where you can also do it through email at city council meetings, and this will be kept as a public record. Next slide.
How to make your voice heard.
Okay, so en esta parte vamos a hablar sobre oportunidades.
So in this slide, we're going to talk about short-term opportunities. So just like we had mentioned earlier, we just wanted to remind you again that the public city budget meeting is tomorrow, Wednesday, June 1st at 5:30 at City Hall. You can attend and give public comment in person. And I'm not very sure if you can send public comments via email, but I know that you can do it in person.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Y igual otra vez le
And
recordamos de la reunión
same
de
thing that
ciudad, va a ser el
there will be
13 de
another city
julio a
council
las
meeting
5
on
p.m.
Monday, June 13th
Igual
at
pueden
6:30 at City
asistir,
Hall. You can
pueden
also
ser
attend
públicos,
this to do
pueden
public comment,
ser público, comentarios públicos por correo
and you can also submit public comments via email.
While the budget is a lot of information and this presentation may have had a lot of things thrown at you and new information, you have already taken the first start at being involved in civic engagement by attending this webinar. So how do you become involved with the budget beyond just the first thing, setting a public comment and letting them know how you feel about the budget? So on a long-term basis, you can engage with your neighborhood council. You can apply for neighborhood council yourselves. We have gotten word that the city has somewhat brought up some of the budget in the neighborhood council, although not as in depth as the budget advisory committee was. So that is a way to keep tabs on the budget. Another is to just stay informed simply through city council meetings and not being afraid to make a public comment. While they have turned public comment into either email or in person, you shouldn't be afraid to say what you feel, because at the end of the day, you are their bosses. You voted them in. These are your tax-paying dollars. So don't be afraid to get involved with what you truly feel. Become an activist. You can participate with local organizations. Buen Vecino is always looking for people to join us. If you're interested in other organizations, that's fine as well. Just getting involved with your community members. This is a presentation for community members by community members. It's all about looking out for your neighbor. Register to vote and studying candidates. I know that it's sort of a myth that only presidential elections matter, and that's just not the case. I would argue that local elections matter even more, because that is a direct tie to your community and your tax-paying dollars. So please remember to vote in every election. I know it's a lot, but it really truly makes a difference on every level, local, state, and federal. And lastly, run for office yourself. If you do not like seeing what is happening within your community, then take it upon yourself to run for office, and then get all those cool friends that you made from the organizations you're a part of to be your campaign team. And we will all just have more representation and the people that we see and support. Next slide, please.
So, muy importante esto ya.
So something really important, it was mentioned earlier too, but we want to let you know that if you are a citizen, please register to vote. We here at Buen Vecino, we have lots of events that we help community members register to vote. Please vote your voice. It is something that you have a right to make and create those changes that you want to see in our community. So please, if you haven't yet, please register to vote. If you have any questions regarding this, or if you don't know where to begin, you can contact us and we will be happy to help you with this. Next slide.
At this time, we will be accepting any questions. We are coming to the end of our presentation, so if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A. If not, thank you so much for engaging with us and coming with us. We really appreciate it. And we hope that you can be a part of either the public forum tomorrow, June 1st at 5:30 p.m. It is in person. And then June 13th is the city council meeting where you can make a public comment about where you want the funding allocations to go to.